Imagine losing your only child. Your home, once full of noise and laughter and life, has gone quiet. You pass his bedroom. You sit at a dinner table with an empty chair. You go through the motions of living, but inside the question burns. Is he gone? Really gone? Or is he somewhere, somehow, still alive? In the spring of 1912, a couple named Mr. and Mrs. Maybank sat down in a room in Wimbledon, England, and something happened that answered that question in a way that neither of them would ever forget, and neither would the retired Royal Navy Admiral who witnessed it. Welcome to Whispers of Hope. Today we're going into the remarkable and thoroughly documented story of Etta Wriedt, a quiet, unassuming woman from Detroit, Michigan, who possessed one of the most astonishing gifts ever recorded in the history of psychical research. First, let me explain what we mean when we talk about direct voice mediumship, because it's quite different from other forms of mediumship you may have heard about. In most mediumship, a medium receives impressions, feelings, or images, and then interprets them for the sitter. The message is filtered through the medium's own mind and personality. Direct voice is different. In direct voice mediumship, the voice of the communicating spirit is heard directly as an independent, audible sound in the room, not from the medium's lips, not as a whisper only one person can hear, a real voice in the air that everyone present can hear and respond to. To help amplify these voices, a trumpet was used, a simple aluminium cone, like a speaking tube that could be placed anywhere in the room. Spirits would speak into one end, and the voice would come out the other. Sometimes the voices were so clear they could have been heard outside the building. Sometimes 2 or 3 different voices spoke simultaneously, in different parts of the room. And with Etta Wriedt, something else remarkable happened. The voices didn't just speak English, they spoke Norwegian, Dutch, German, Croatian, Serbian, languages that Mrs. Wriedt herself, a modest woman from Michigan, had never learned a word of in her life. Etta Wriedt lived in Detroit, Michigan. She was not a professional spiritualist in the theatrical sense. She did not dress the part. She did not perform. By all accounts, she was an ordinary, unpretentious American woman. What she possessed was a gift she had been born with and could not fully explain. She never went into a trance. She remained fully conscious and conversational throughout every sitting. She would simply sit quietly in a chair, and the voices would come. She was introduced to the wider world through one of the most prominent journalists of the age, William Thomas Stead, the founder of investigative journalism in Britain, editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, a man who had dined with presidents and corresponded with royalty. Stead was also a committed investigator of psychical phenomena, and he had established in London what he called Julia's Bureau, a free service where ordinary grieving people could come, be introduced to mediums incognito, and seek contact with those they had lost. In 1911, Stead brought Etta Wriedt to England. The results stunned everyone who witnessed them. He invited her back for a second visit in 1912, and then on the morning of April 15, 1912, Etta Wriedt received word that the Titanic had sunk. William Stead, was dead. The book that records all of this was written by Vice Admiral W. Usborne Moore, a retired Royal Navy officer, a man of science and military discipline, not a credulous believer, but someone who had attended over 100 sittings with Etta Wriedt. Admiral Moore arranged for Etta Wriedt to come to England anyway, despite Stead's death, and keep her original commitment. She arrived at Wimbledon on the evening of May 5, 1912, just 20 days after the Titanic disaster. After supper, she proposed a sitting. The lights were lowered. The room went quiet. And William Stead came through. He manifested that first evening with 3 specific, verifiable tests of his identity. 2 to Miss Harper, the hostess, and 1 to Admiral Moore, referencing a private conversation that had taken place between himself and Moore just before he sailed. A conversation about this very visit, about conditions Moore had been asked to observe. Stead referenced it with emphasis, in a way that was unmistakable to the Admiral. He came back again the following Wednesday evening. He proposed in characteristic fashion that the weekly sittings continue in his memory. The room was pitch dark. He noticed that Admiral Moore had not raised his hand in support. He said, "Admiral Moore, you have not held up your hand." Moore raised it. His head was immediately struck twice by a trumpet. And Stead added, "I was hit in this room once in the same way." He continued coming week after week, and everyone who heard him, those who had known him in life, said the same thing. The voice, the manner, the humor, the characteristic expressions were unmistakably his. You couldn't sit in that room and not know it was William Stead. One of the most powerful and difficult to explain features of the Wriedt sittings is the sheer variety of languages spoken. In one session, a Croatian barrister named Dr. Hinkovic sat with Etta Wriedt. A voice came through and addressed him in Croatian. A full conversation followed in that language. Mrs. Wriedt sat in the room, hearing for the first time in her life what Croatian sounded like, unable to understand a word of it. The distinguished Serbian diplomat Count Mijatovic, who had 3 times represented his country at the court of Queen Victoria, attended a sitting and heard his own mother speak to him in Serbian. He then watched as Madame Salenka, one of Germany's leading scientists, had a long conversation with her late husband, Professor Salenka of Munich University, in German, and then heard a Norwegian woman speak to Mrs. Anker in Norwegian. A Serbian diplomat, an Austrian scientist, a Norwegian woman, a Croatian lawyer, each hearing their most intimate loved ones speak in their native language, through a woman from Michigan who had never spoken anything but English in her life. How do you explain that? But of all the cases recorded in this book, there is one I want to spend some time on because it speaks directly to anyone who has ever lost a child. Mr. and Mrs. Maybank had lost their only son, Harold. He had died of consumption, tuberculosis, at the age of nearly 21, He had been ill for years, had suffered greatly, and then he was gone. They were devastated. And then, through a series of remarkable coincidences, they found their way to Wimbledon, to Admiral Moore, to Etta Wriedt. They attended a general circle sitting with around 10 other people. The room went dark. The Lord's Prayer was spoken aloud. A hymn was sung, and then the voices began, to other sitters, to others in the circle. And finally the trumpet moved. And Harold spoke. His parents recognized his voice immediately. Not a voice that sounded somewhat like him, not an impression. His voice, the voice they had listened to for 20 years, had sung him to sleep with, had heard calling them from the other stairs. His voice coming from a tin trumpet in a dark room in Wimbledon. "Hello, Mom. Hello, Dad. How are you? I am so pleased you are here tonight, through the kindness of Admiral Moore." Then he told them he was perfectly sound now. He was happy. He was with his mother's grandmother. And then, unprompted, he said to his mother, "Did you get your rose, Mom? I gave it to Dad to pass to you." Because a rose had been brought and placed in his father's hand earlier in the sitting, before Harold had spoken, and his mother had been disappointed, not knowing it was meant for her. Harold had known. He had seen it. He had been there. At the second sitting, Harold came back as promised, and his father decided to ask a test question, something completely impossible for anyone in that room to know, something small, private, almost silly. He said, "Harold, do you remember poor old Cyril?" And Harold laughed. "Of course I do, Dad. Didn't I tease him? And didn't he growl?" And he imitated, through the trumpet, the sound of an angry cat. Mr. Maybank wrote these words. The most extraordinary moment came at their final private sitting. Just the Maybanks, Mrs. Wright, and Admiral Moore in a darkened room. Harold came through with a voice described as stronger than at any previous sitting. His mother asked him a question that only he and she could know the answer to. "Harold, do you know what it was I tucked in the front of your shirt as you lay in your coffin?" "Of course I do, Mum. It was that piece of gold you gave me." Years earlier, his mother had given him a small nugget of gold. He had treasured it. He had always kept it with him, said he would never be without a piece of gold in his purse. And he had kept his word. It was still in his possession when he died. As he lay in his coffin, his mother had quietly taken it from his purse and tucked it against his heart. No one knew that. No other living person in that room knew that. But Harold knew. He went on to speak of things that had happened at home since his death. He mentioned that 2 small pastel drawings he had bought were now framed and hanging on the wall. He had noticed. He had been home. He was watching. And then he said something that his mother and father carried with them for the rest of their lives. "You are not to worry. It is all for the best. Even if I could, I would not like to return to earth life. The life in the spirit world is so lovely. so beautiful. I am so well and strong, never tired, always happy, and love is so abundant. The book containing all of these accounts was published in 1913 by Vice Admiral Moore under the title The Voices, a careful documented record of over 100 sittings with Etta Wriedt, with contributions from diplomats, military officers, scientists, clergymen, lawyers, and ordinary grieving people. The Admiral himself concludes that no fraud, no trickery, no telepathy, no coincidence can account for what he witnessed. He writes that his one purpose in collecting and publishing these accounts was for those who mourn, that they might be, in some measure, consoled by reflecting on how close the spirits of those they have lost truly are. Every single sitting described in this book features the same elements, voices that knew things no living person in the room could have known, names not mentioned, memories not shared, languages not spoken, details tucked in coffins, cats named Cyril. And again, the message from those who had crossed over was the same: not fear, not darkness, not silence. Happiness, love, home, I am well, I am watching, I am close. Harold Maybanks said it most simply and most beautifully: love is so abundant. If you are watching this today because you are grieving, because you have lost someone and the silence is unbearable, then this video was made for you. These records are not fairy stories. They were compiled by a Navy admiral, witnessed by diplomats, doctors, lawyers, and clergymen. They were published in 1913, and they still stand. Not one of these witnesses ever retracted their accounts. Your loved ones are not gone. They are close. They were there in that room in Wimbledon, and they are there with you now. Thank you for watching Whispers of Hope. If this brought you any comfort today, please share it with someone who needs it. You never know who is sitting alone right now, in a quiet house, needing to hear exactly this. See you in the next one.